Secretary of War, the Honorable Pete Hegseth, recently briefed roughly 800 generals and flag officers and their enlisted advisory counterparts on how the Department of War intends to proceed into the future. This involves new standards for personnel, mission, and training. I watched the entire 45-minute video so you don't have to, and I want to point out some of the Secretary's remarks and how it could affect the military, good and bad. If you want a link to the full video, you can find that at ryanbeth.substack.com for free. But if you have $5 to support my work, I wouldn't say no. Let's get started in the video.
From this moment forward, the only mission of the newly restored Department of War is this: warfighting. Preparing for war and preparing to win.
Now to start, I don't necessarily see that as a controversial statement, but I'm also Ryan Macbeth. Every morning when I wake up, my first thought is how are we going to fight China in 2027, 2028? And when I go to sleep, my very last thought is how are we going to fight China in 2027, 2028? I have a whole series on the order of battle, the People's Liberation Army, their Navy, their Air Force, along with a biography of President Xi of China. It's available for free at ryanbeth.substack.com. And if you're in the military, if you want an offline copy or the slides, I'll give it to you for free. If we are not 100% focused on being able to fight China by Xi Jinping's date of 2027, we're still going to war, but we're going to do it in a less prepared fashion. So in some ways, I'm glad that finally somebody has said this.
You see, this urgent moment, of course, requires more troops, more munitions, more drones, more Patriots, more submarines, more B-21 bombers. It requires more innovation, more AI in everything and ahead of the curve, more cyber effects, more counter-UAS, more space, more speed. America is the strongest, but we need to get stronger and quickly.
Again, this is not a controversial statement. When Admiral Lisa Franchetti was fired as Navy Chief of Staff, no reason was given, but a lot of people implied it was because she was a woman. I will toss out something else. I look at the Constitution-class frigate. This was essentially supposed to be an off-the-shelf French-Italian design, supposed to have 85% parts commonality with that platform. After subsequent design changes, it has 15% parts commonality. The price increased from $1.14 billion per ship to $1.6 billion per ship. So less than an Arleigh Burke. But look, if you were the CEO of a company, how long would you last if you told the shareholders, oh, hey, this thing we were building is going to cost 40% more? So yeah, we need to hold senior leaders accountable when they allow poor decision-making to affect our readiness, especially when it comes to materiel.
It requires, as President Trump has done, getting our allies and partners to step up and share the burden. America cannot do everything. The free world requires allies with real hard power, real military leadership, and real military capabilities.
Now, the Secretary isn't wrong. Last February, when Vice President Vance went to the Munich Security Conference and basically said to Europe that their free ride was over, I was in Poland at a NATO event a few days afterwards, and I felt how much our allies were betrayed, because believe me, they told me. And I wish different words had been used by the Vice President, but our allies did get the message.
The best way to take care of troops is to give them good leaders committed to the warfighting culture of the department. Not perfect leaders, good leaders. Competent, qualified, professional, agile, aggressive, innovative, risk-taking, apolitical, faithful to their oath and to the Constitution.
Perfect is the enemy of good. And a little bit later, I'll get into the problem with the military's zero-defect culture when the Secretary touches on that. But his line about apolitical and faithful to the Constitution is exactly what we should expect of our military leaders. There were a lot of talking heads on the internet who claimed that the president was going to use this meeting as an opportunity to jail generals who refused to take a loyalty oath. I don't think that was ever in question. Now, the next statement was the first kind of weird thing that I noticed.
For too long, we've promoted too many uniformed leaders for the wrong reasons, based on their race, based on gender quotas, based on historic so-called firsts. We've pretended that combat arms and non-combat arms are the same thing.
Now, Secretary Hegseth served in the Army National Guard as an infantry officer. He deployed multiple times. He resigned at the rank of major. And he had a few breaks in service, but I believe he served a total of, I guess, about 9 years or so. I did 20 years. I retired as a sergeant first class. I have never once personally experienced any kind of pressure to to promote someone based on race, although I retired before women were accepted into combat arms roles, so I don't know about that end of things. Also, as a non-commissioned officer, I don't really promote anybody. I give evaluations. Those evaluations are then used to decide who gets promoted, but it's mainly officers who promote. Now, the promotion system for every branch is different. For the Army, actually I believe for most branches, for lower ranking enlisted, you get promoted based on time and service. As long as you don't screw up, you get promoted until you reach the rank of E4. And I believe most branches are similar. When you head into the non-commissioned officer ranks, at least on the Army side, you typically have a promotion board. So I'm not really sure where this is coming from. I never once received pressure to give a minority soldier a better rating so they could be promoted. I never once heard of any other NCO ever getting pressure either. That being said, I have no idea what goes on in officer land. But from my own personal experiences, I never once heard of this happening. Now, when it comes to combat arms and non-combat arms being considered the same when it comes to standards, I can see how that might be an issue.
I don't want my son serving alongside troops who are out of shape, or in combat unit with females who can't meet the same combat arms physical standards as men, or troops who are not fully proficient on their assigned weapons, platform, or task, or under a leader who was the first, but not the best. Standards must be uniform, gender neutral, and high.
Now again, I don't see anything controversial with this. I don't know how many women are in combat arms, meaning infantry, armor, and artillery, but women make up about 18% of the military in general. I have trained and embedded with a lot of military units while making YouTube videos about airborne operations, air assault, flight school, sniper school. I have never once personally met a female combat arms soldier. That doesn't mean they don't exist. And I would imagine that the women who tend to go into combat arms are pretty freaking high speed to start. Now, there is a non-zero chance that some women join the infantry because they grew up hunting and fishing and hiking like a lot of infantrymen do. But humping a day pack and a 30-30 looking for a deer is a lot different than humping a full rucksack and a mortar. But it's also possible that some women went to infantry school, they passed the minimum standards, and then when they got to their real unit, they couldn't perform. And so what happens to them? Well, they end up in the battalion headquarters on the radio with all of the other men who also couldn't meet the standards or who passed the standards at a minimum, and they're too skinny to perform their combat arms job. So I think that's how an outlier kind of becomes a crisis.
Each service will ensure that every requirement for every combat MOS, for every designated combat arms position, returns to the highest male standard only. Because this job is life or death. Standards must be met. And not just met, at every level we should seek to exceed the standard, to push the envelope, to compete. It's common sense and core to who we are and what we do. It should be in our DNA. Today, at my direction, we are also adding a combat field test for combat arms units that must be executable in any environment at any time and with combat equipment. These tests, they'll look familiar. They'll resemble the Army Expert Physical Fitness Assessment or the Marine Corps Combat Fitness Test. I'm also directing that warfighters in combat jobs execute their service fitness test at a gender-neutral, age-normed male standard scored above 70%.
I'm mainly thinking of those older E6s and E7s in the Army who are like master gunners, Bradley master gunners, Abrams master gunners. These are guys who are older, they have vast knowledge on weapon systems, and we've spent thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars training and educating these people. And when you have some of those older soldiers who are in that career field, they're very, very hard to replace. So I have a feeling that a program like this might get delayed or paused because we're just losing too many technical experts who meet the minimum standards, but not whatever this enhanced standard might be. And also, we can't set up soldiers for failure. There are lots of posts which show chow hall food is not good, or there's not enough of it. Or we ask our soldiers to work 16 hours so that all the Apaches in a squadron are mission ready, and because of that, these soldiers miss chow. Or they get to chow right before it closes and there's essentially no food left. And then we wonder why our soldiers go to Burger King. Also, there's a lot of gyms on post that are not 24-hour gyms. So let's say you have a soldier who wants to work out after dinner. He might only have a 1-hour window to do that, and that's when everyone else is also in the gym. So while I understand the desire for soldiers to get fit, are the chow halls open? Are they serving good quality food? Are the gyms staffed and open 24 hours? If the answer is no to any of those three things, these proposals are not going to work.
This also means grooming standards. No more beards, long hair, superficial individual expression. We're going to cut our hair, shave our beards, and adhere to standards.
The beard thing is going to be a massive problem, especially among African Americans who suffer from razor bumps. Roughly 1/3 of African Americans have this condition, and we're going to lose a lot of soldiers. I don't know where this obsession with beards is coming from. Plenty of our NATO allies seem to function well with beards. If there's a standard, let's make it like, all right, a soldier's allowed to have a 1/4 inch beard or whatever. And if you're in a job like firefighting or chemical defense, you have to shave, or you go find a new job. And what we don't want is some soldier just not shaving for a few days because they're lazy and saying, oh, I'm growing a beard. So maybe in order to fix something like that, we require that if you want to grow a beard, you have to take 2 weeks of leave, grow your beard, then come back. That's something that could probably solve that problem. Rough numbers, there's about 95,000 African American soldiers in the U.S. Army. If you figure that 80% of those soldiers are male, roughly, then that's like 76,000. If 1/3 of those African American soldiers have a medical condition which makes shaving painful, causes razor bumps, then that's 25,000 soldiers that we're going to have to separate. That's like 5 brigades worth of soldiers that we have to replace just because we couldn't hand them a shaving waiver because we want uniformity. Now multiply that times the other services. This is going to be a huge, huge problem.
Today, at my direction, we're undertaking a full review of the department's definitions of so-called toxic leadership, bullying, and hazing, to empower leaders to enforce standards without fear of retribution or second guessing. Of course, you can't do like nasty bullying and hazing. We're talking about words like bullying and hazing and toxic. They've been weaponized and bastardized inside our formations.
Now this one's kind of scary because what is bullying? I'm a Protestant Ulster loyalist from Northern Ireland. When I joined, my squad leader was a Catholic from the Irish Republic. And yeah, you could say I was bullied a little bit by my squad leader. But once I proved myself, I was treated like everybody else, which was bad because I was a private and it was the 1990s. And the question here is, where do you draw the line between hazing and not okay hazing, right? And I kind of feel that this line, we're going to allow bullying, but not too much bullying. Where exactly is that line? I think that's a very dangerous road to go down.
But when it comes to any job that requires physical power to perform in combat, those physical standards must be high and gender neutral. If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is.
I don't see anything wrong with this statement. I know it's one of the fears when the secretary is being confirmed that he doesn't want women in combat roles. So this is a clarifying statement. The next thing that was said didn't receive a lot of attention, but I think the most important thing said during this speech, and nobody is talking about it, comes up next.
Third, we are attacking and ending the walking on eggshells and zero-defect command culture. A risk-averse culture means officers execute not to lose instead of to win. A risk-averse culture means NCOs are not empowered to enforce standards. Commanders and NCOs don't take necessary risks or make tough adjustments for fear of rocking the boat or making mistakes.
This is super important, and I wish we could stitch this onto a pillow or write it in the sky. When General Colin Powell was a second lieutenant in 1958, he lost his sidearm, his pistol, and he wondered whether he should look for it or tell his commander that he had lost it. Now, losing a weapon in the Army is a big freaking deal. So Powell radioed his commander and told him what happened. Later, the commander met with Powell and gave him a lecture, and then afterwards he handed him back the pistol, which had been found at some point. And if that had happened today, Powell would have been fired. Gone. And Powell went on to have this incredible career. Now, I know the Navy, without a doubt, has a zero-defect mindset. In some ways, it kind of makes sense. You're on a freaking ship in the middle of the ocean that can sink. But, I think the zero defect mindset can also result in a poor climate, in a poor command climate, poor morale. Why doesn't the captain let the sailors go for swim call? Right? It's where they stop the ship, let the sailors swim in the ocean. Well, someone could drown, right? And now that's on my record that someone drowned. Now, weigh that with, well, the sailors will always have memories of when they got to swim in the Atlantic Ocean off the side of the ship. Now, yes, drowning is bad, but you can put control measures into place, right? Lifeguards, shark watch, whatever. But that ship captain who's thinking of his career and thinking, man, I don't want to lose my career, and by letting these guys go to swim call in case someone drowns, it's just easier not to do swim call. And people wonder why morale is broken. And I think that leads into the next thing that was said.
But you should not pay for earnest mistakes for your entire career. And that's why today, at my direction, we're making changes to the retention of adverse information on personnel records that will allow leaders with forgivable, earnest, or minor infractions to not be encumbered by those infractions in perpetuity.
And I agree with this. Let's just say the commander allowed his company to have a beer at the company cookout, and some soldier got drunk and got a DWI. Should that commander be held accountable for the rest of his career because he let his soldiers drink at a picnic, which is something a lot of companies in the real civilian companies in the real world let people do? Should that commander be held accountable that he allowed this soldier got drunk? And I think that if there were control measures in place and this soldier somehow overcame those control measures because he wanted to get drunk, I don't see how that's a ding against the commander. I think that a lot of the fun things that we had in the military were slowly taken away because commanders were afraid that they would be held accountable if something happened. Again, you have to have control measures to make sure bad things don't happen. But just saying no because, oh my God, my career, it really does restrict what we're able to do.
But if the words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign. We would thank you for your service.
Now, whether you agree with the Secretary of War or not, he is still in charge. We still have civilian control over the military, and this is the Secretary's decision. So this is pretty stark, although I think that most of these flag officers are going to stay.
Today, at my direction, we are drastically reducing the ridiculous amount of mandatory training that individuals and units must execute. We've already ended the most egregious. Now we're giving you back real time. Less PowerPoint briefings and fewer online courses, more time in the motor pool, and more time on the range.
So this is good news. When the Secretary said the most egregious, he was referring to what I guess is perceived as woke indoctrination. Again, this is kind of the same thing I said with the perception of promotion based on race. Again, I never saw that. I never saw any woke indoctrination, neither as a soldier nor when I was embedded with units. I did go to a pride celebration on the USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier, and honestly, I think it was just an excuse to have cake. I think most of the people were just there for cake. But one major complaint soldiers have is that there are times when there are these endless PowerPoint briefings, and it could be like motorcycle safety. The Army comes out with a new policy on motorcycle safety, and everybody has to watch the slideshow presentation even if they don't have a motorcycle. And yeah, it's great to get that time back, but it only works if we have the funding to go to the range or do maintenance. So going to the range and doing maintenance are important, but the question here is, do we have the money to go to the range and do maintenance in the next fiscal year and in the fiscal years to come? So hopefully that will be forthcoming.
Basic training is being restored to what it should be. Scary, tough, and disciplined. We're empowering drill sergeants to instill healthy fear in new recruits, ensuring that future warfighters are forged. Yes, they can shark attack, they can toss bunks, they can swear, and yes, they can put their hands on recruits. This does not mean they can be reckless or violate the law, but they can use tried and true methods to motivate.
One of the purposes of basic training is to weed out people who can't handle stress. The military is very stressful. When someone's shooting at you, that is very stressful. Current basic training, at least in the Army, does have less yelling but more team building. I assume with this directive it will change. When I went through basic training in the 1990s, I was genuinely afraid of getting yelled at, and that motivated me to behave. But I wasn't necessarily afraid of letting down my team, at least not until a few weeks later when we kind of gelled as a team. And right now, the Army kind of has a program where the Army's current approach is that if you focus on creating loyalty to your team and create team-based exercise that make a soldier afraid of letting his team down, wanting his team to win, that might be more effective than yelling. So now it looks like we might be back to yelling, but honestly, we could do both. We could do yelling and team building, you know? I don't want to lose this team building aspect that it seems like the Army is kind of focused on. So I think there's a lot of young men who are looking to bond with other young men, and I certainly hope that this aspect of basic training isn't eliminated just in favor of yelling, because that's what we used to do. Now, when it comes to putting your hands on a soldier, I disagree with that 100%. Because it can go from like a boot in the ass to get a soldier back in line to a freaking assault charge like that. So I think maybe that being allowed again, that could work in some circumstances. If someone isn't listening, you can freaking grab them, push them into position. But I don't really see that being implemented with drill sergeants who are currently on the trail.
We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters.
So this was an interesting one. I can tell you that I never once felt constrained by my rules of engagement. If I really had to give an example, Iraq in 2009, we weren't allowed to have automatic grenade launchers, Mark 19s, on our vehicles doing convoys in Baghdad because it was too destructive. Now, there is a big difference between Baghdad in 2003, when you were using Mark 19s, and Baghdad in 2009. But, you know, I'm coming at this from the standpoint of an infantryman, but I know why the Secretary said this. When we fight China in 2027, 2028, we're going to have a lot of dispersed units that are on islands, and they can't call back to CENTCOM and say, well, it wouldn't be CENTCOM, Indo-PACOM. They can't go back and say, hey, can we blow up this PLA tank that's right next to an apartment building? It could be because their communications are jammed, because the situation is moving too fast. And that kind of fear from the soldiers who once were lieutenants during the Global War on Terror and are now colonels and generals, that fear of being wrong about targeting something is real. And we probably do need to give them a more permissive rules of engagement for times when they can't call someone and ask. And then when they do make that choice and they make the wrong choice, we need to be very careful about how we hold them accountable, especially if they didn't have all the information at the time. So on the whole, I think this was a good speech with many valid points. My main concerns moving forward are fitness standards without reevaluating our chow hall and our gym policies, and beards. The beard thing, plenty of armies in Europe have beards. The Ukrainians have beards. They seem to be doing okay. But I tell you, if we try to implement what the Secretary wants with those three things without addressing the underlying causes, there's going to be a lot of consequences for readiness. And hey, if you want to support my work, head on over to ryanbeth.substack.com. It's $5 a month. Thank you so much for watching.
It's me, Captain Bannon of the documentary Team Yankee. When I'm not kicking commie butts, I'm wearing t-shirts from Ryan Macbeth, available at Bunker Branding, Knife Hands, HIMARS, Landmines, Patriot, and even my favorite, the tow missile. Mushna, we want t-shirt too. Take a hike, commie. So come on down to Bunker Branding and take a stand for what's really important about America. Capitalism.